Today we have a crazy story of revenge on a parent's creepy friend. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my cheating ex-girlfriend and high school lover became a victim of my vengeance. My cheating girlfriend had only her best interest at heart. Little did she know that the best part of our relationship was yet to come. I made sure that she would regret her actions in all of its totality, making sure that she felt the same way I felt after she left me. My ex-girlfriend, female 24, and I, male 27, were partners, and have been in a relationship for the most part of the last 4 years of both of our lives. But we've always been best of friends, and this was for as long as I can remember. My ex-girlfriend, let's call her Z, has always been some sort of an odd character. In her own way, she has a very different and unique way of going about things, relating with people and a whole lot of other things. Now, don't get me wrong, this was what truly made her unique, and practically what brought about room for myself developing intimate feelings for her. Feelings that were way beyond our usual friendship. Taking a short trip down memory lane, I can vaguely remember the first time we met, as we both were just fresh out of middle school and were simply just freshmen at the same high school. Although we were taking different classes, we both, although at the time had not conversed with each other at all. We were still coincidentally bumping into each other, and this was happening more times than we could count, until eventually I guess she couldn't help but stop for a conversation one very day. We came across each other in the hallway while we both were on our ways to our respective classes. She introduced herself and I followed suit. Her voice was just as I had imagined it. She was calm, composed, and spoke really intellectually. Unlike myself, I was quite literally all over the place, and if I could take a guess, I would say that my fidgeting was clearly visible by her. Anyways, due to the urgency of our classes, we both agreed to meet up right after school and possibly continue the conversation from there, which to me sounded like a plan indeed. Now, we met as planned, and our conversation surely continues right from that moment onwards. I got to know her more in-depthly, albeit the short period of time we spent that day, and to my greatest surprise, while I wasn't sure what to expect from our conversation, she actually wanted us to meet up again the next day. And what I was feeling at this particular time was by far one of the best feelings I'd ever had till date. The next day turned to another day, and another day, and another day, till we were eventually inseparable. In the long run, we both had come to realize that we basically had become the other person's favorite person. Now on to the main character of my story, aside from myself anyways. Now, Z and I were friends quite literally from the first day we met, and being her friend, there were a lot of things that I'd come to realize. One of which was the fact that she had an odd, or rather a bizarre way of handling things. I know how this sounds, but let me explain. And to make you better understand what I'm talking about, I'll be making a reference to a certain event that occurred back when we were still in high school. So Z, being the chic young lady that she was at the time, was quite popular amongst our peers, which consequently made me equally famous. This wasn't something that I really wanted, but I just knew that as long as we were friends and were hanging out with each other, there was no avoiding this. So in her popularity, I was already beginning to notice some changes in her personality. For starters, she developed an unhealthy habit of bullying, not physically bullying someone, but then she went through all the stress of bullying her victims verbally and every other type of bullying possible, all except for making use of physical force. There was this one girl that was apparently a former friend of hers who was the first person I saw her bully, like right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do. She taunted and humiliated her right in front of everyone in the entire school. Now, this wasn't something that I was in support of, as prior to that particular day, I was always of the belief that all the rumors I was hearing about her were ultimately false, as there was usually no evidence to back up the claim and all. The only problem with my initial assumption was that I never for once tried to find out what exactly the truth was. Maybe I wasn't interested, or rather, maybe I was scared to find out the truth, as there might be no disparity in her character and in the rumors that were circulating around her. I was eventually compelled to bring her to order, as I felt like it was the one thing I could do as her friend. Since everyone else was just saying stuff behind her back and all, I didn't even know what to expect when I did this, but then she was surprisingly cooperative and understanding. Once I gave her a piece of my mind and told her in full what, or rather how exactly her actions had affected everyone around her, she was immediately remorseful of her actions. Not that this would reverse what she had done to the girl from before, but then as long as she was no longer going down that path, that was sufficient enough for me. Now, that was just one out of many other incidents that occurred back when we were in high school, and throughout all of these, I got to find out that we had gotten even closer to each other. So much so that I got to realize sooner rather than later that I developed feelings for her. Now, these feelings were strong and overwhelming, and it wasn't something that I could keep bottled up for long. And so I broke the ice on the matter. Luckily for me again, she was also open about her feelings for me too, as she says she had never felt that way about someone. She also claimed that her feelings were genuine and that she couldn't have hoped for a better partner than myself. This really made me feel overly elated, basically on top of the world at that very moment. Now here comes the best part of my story. Totally disregarding all of her previous and then current flaws, I totally fell head over heels for her. I even noticed that we'd gotten much closer than before, ever since we both confessed our feelings to one another and even got into a relationship. We shared lots of memorable and unforgettable moments together, and even though that we both knew that ultimately our journey in high school was coming to an end, this didn't hinder whatever it was that we both had going on for us at the time. The problem came about a full month after we both had shared our first kiss, and ultimately intimate moment with each other. It happened at her house, and immediately after that, there was this moment of awkwardness that transpired between the both of us, which I felt was normal, considering the manner in which we both had just shared our first time and all. But then this was soon overshadowed by the affection that came after from me, and we both were able to take our minds off of what had just happened, or so I thought. The very next day, I could feel a change in her person. It wasn't a significant change per se, but it was definite that she had changed, and the only thing that changed that I could notice was her attitude towards everyone in general and in myself in particular. I couldn't wrap my finger around what exactly had changed, not until some few weeks later, when she eventually let the cat out of the bag about what was really the matter with the both of us. She claimed that she wasn't feeling the vibe that we initially had, and that she also didn't feel we were compatible with each other. And apparently, according to her, she figured this out on the night that we consummated our love. To cut the long story short, this was her own way of breaking up with me. It felt surreal. I was in a state of utter disbelief from that moment onwards, and for about an entire month and a half, my mind was in a haze. I couldn't gather my thoughts properly. I was just confused all day, every day. Was this how it felt to be used? Was this how our friendship was going to end? Was what we had even real? Those were the questions that were running through my mind all through the entire month. I even tried several times to contact her and even approach her at school and back at her place, but then she turned me down every single time, which didn't help matters at all. Now the funny thing was, it was seeming like I was the only one not being kept in the loop, as it was soon brought to my notice by some other friends of mine who said that, apparently, she was seen on multiple occasions with the captain of the school's football captain, who drives one of the most luxurious cars even amongst all the teachers. This wasn't even the part that really upset me, as I was also informed, and I heard from the rumors of students of course, that they had apparently been together for as long as 2 whole months. And we had just broken up about a month and a half ago. This led to me really thinking back on some of the things that had happened over the past few weeks. My thoughts got so overwhelming that I had to confront her by all possible means possible and get much needed answers. Now, unfortunately for her and unluckily for me, she and the school's football captain had just gone through a very serious argument, and she was still trying to gather herself when I confronted her. This made her lash out unapologetically. She immediately started pouring out how she never really had feelings for me and I was simply nothing more than a boy toy for her amusement. She made sure I realized that I had no worth to her, not anymore anyways, and she made sure that things between us ended completely with no hope of revival. I went home that night filled not with sadness, but with a burning passion for revenge. I went as far as using some underhanded means that I'm not proud of to ensure that the remaining time she was going to spend in high school was going to be compromised, and also that her future would also face the same fate. I didn't even have to do much. All I needed to do was contact a good friend of mine that deals, and made a deal with him to purchase an insane amount of goods and place them in Z's custody. All in places where she would never even think to look, but at the same time, out in the open. From there, I just anonymously tipped the school authorities about what I suspected she was into, and the rest was history. Basically, she got suspended from the school initially, which was for about an entire academic session, and then this in turn left a scar on her application for college, as no college was willing to accept a delinquent. Long story short, till this day, I don't think she's ever had anything go well for her, as she is always struggling with her past, which inadvertently includes myself. I'm curious if people think, considering everything that happened here and what she did to OP, if what OP did is in the least bit fair, utterly ruining this person's future because they were a cheater. In no way am I trying to defend her, but does being a cheater justify ruining their academic future? I'd be curious what you guys think. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is Drunk Billiard Player Gets Karma for His Stupid Behavior. I remember what it used to be like in the early 2000s. Times were much simpler then, to be honest, and now as I remember, I have nothing but nostalgic feelings about those times. My friends and I had a favorite hangout spot. It was a small, cozy billiards place in a nearby town. This place had an old-school charm with dim lighting casting a warm glow, the sound of classic rock softly playing in the background, and the comforting clatter of pool balls. We'd been coming here for months, renting a table by the hour, playing games, watching sports on the TV mounted in the corner, and just soaking in the relaxed atmosphere. My friends and I were a tight-knit bunch, kind of like the vibe you'd get from the Friends and the Friends sitcom. There was Jake, the one who always put us in check, aka our leader. He was always calm and composed no matter the situation. Then there was Tony the jokester, whose infectious laughter could lighten any mood. He always had a joke ready, making sure we never took things too seriously. Mark the strategist was the brains of our group. He loved creating plans and figuring out the best way to tackle any challenge. Lastly, there was Sam, the quiet observer who had a knack for noticing the little details the rest of us might miss. He often pointed out things that would escape our attention. Then there was me, ever the one that started the fight. The billiards was a place that was very special to us. It was our little escape, our little haven where we all came to unwind and leave all the various worries behind. Was someone having a bad time at home from a wicked auntie, or someone's dad refusing to step up and act like the responsible parent he was supposed to be? The minute we entered the room, all that died away. Every visit was filled with laughter, friendly competition, and the kind of bond that only good friends share. It wasn't just about playing pool, it was about the bond we'd built over countless games and conversations. One particular night, our routine was interrupted by the arrival of a rude guy who strutted in like he owned the place. He immediately took our usual billiards table, acting as if no one else existed. At first, we didn't mind too much. We were just engrossed in our conversation, reminiscing about old times, laughing at Tony's latest jokes. The guy seemed intense, focused solely on his game, oblivious to the friendly atmosphere that usually filled the room. However, as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that this guy wasn't planning to share. He continued playing game after game, completely ignoring the fact that others were waiting. His presence cast a shadow over our night, but we tried to stay relaxed, figuring he would eventually move on. Unfortunately, he didn't, and our patience began to wear thin. After about 20 minutes, I decided to step up and handle the situation. I walked over to the table and politely said, "Hey, do you mind if we get the next game?" The guy barely glanced at me before waving me off dismissively as if I were an annoying fly. His rudeness was shocking, and I could feel the tension rising among my friends. Jake, always the calm leader, tried to keep things cool, but even he looked annoyed. As the guy continued to hog the table, other customers started to notice. A woman who had been waiting even longer than us approached and asked if she could play the next game. Just like before, the guy ignored her completely. The atmosphere in the room shifted from friendly to uncomfortable, and it was clear that this guy was disrupting everyone's night. The already sour situation got a lot worse when the guy left the table, with the green 6 ball with him to the bathroom. It was a sick move to prevent anyone else from playing. It's safe to say that we were stunned by his audacity. The woman who had asked earlier was visibly frustrated, and I could see the annoyance in Tony's eyes. The room, once filled with lighthearted chatter and laughter, now felt tense and uneasy. Seeing no other option, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I approached the manager, explaining the situation. "This guy is causing problems for everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The manager, a sympathetic older man who had seen his fair share of barroom drama, nodded understandingly. However, he seemed hesitant to escalate the situation, especially so close to closing time. He glanced at the clock. It was 12:30, nearly the last call. The manager sighed and said, "I understand, but I don't want to cause a scene. Let me get you another ball so you can continue playing." He handed me a replacement for the green 6 ball, and we returned to our game, trying to salvage what was left of our night. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than nothing. As we started playing, trying to get the best use of time before it would be closing hours at the bar, the guy came back inside. He was smirking with a smug look on his face, clearly enjoying the chaos he had caused. He tossed the green ball back onto our table with a careless flick, sending our carefully arranged balls rolling in every direction. "Oops," he said sarcastically, a sneer playing on his lips. He then strutted over to the bar just in time for last call, grabbing another beer before heading outside for a cigarette. He took his beer and the green ball with him, adding insult to injury. It had gone way beyond not retaliating in the most petty way possible. We were beyond livid. Apart from the fact that we knew if we didn't take a stand, he would only come every night and make a place we enjoyed turn to a place we loathe, we were also all for standing up against the bully that he was. He probably thought he could get away with anything. We had to come up with a plan that would put him in serious trouble and leave him questioning his life choices. Mark suggested we teach the guy a lesson he wouldn't forget. "Let's follow him home and report him as a drunk driver," he proposed. The idea was genius. We all agreed, knowing that if we coordinated our efforts, we could pull it off. Using our trusty Nextel push-to-talk phones, we began to plan our moves. Jake would follow the guy when he left, while the rest of us would make calls to the highway patrol, reporting his erratic driving. We watched as the guy finished his cigarettes and drinks, stumbled out of the billiards place, and headed to his car. Jake took charge of tailing him. "I'll follow him. You guys stay here and keep in touch," he said, grabbing his keys. He was calm and composed as always, but there was a glint of determination in his eyes. Jake kept a safe distance as the guy's car weaved through the streets. He gave us regular updates via our Nextel push-to-talk phones. "He's turning onto Elm Street," Jake reported, still driving erratically. The anticipation built with each passing minute. We knew we were doing the right thing, but the waiting was nerve-wracking. The guy's car swerved dangerously close to a curb, nearly hitting a parked car. Jake's updates kept our adrenaline pumping. "He's really all over the place. The cops better get here soon." We made our calls to the highway patrol, giving them the details of the guy's car and his reckless driving. Our hearts pounded as we waited for the police to intervene, hoping our plan would work. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw the flashing lights of a police car in the distance. "Guys, I see the cops," Jake's voice crackled through the Nextel. The police car approached and we held our breath, watching intently. The officer pulled up behind the guy's car, lights flashing brightly in the night. The rude guy seemed to panic, trying to keep driving, but the officer wasn't having it. The police car maneuvered in front of him, forcing him to pull over. Our excitement was palpable as he watched from a distance. The officer stepped out and approached the guy's car, shining a flashlight through the window. The guy looked flustered and agitated, his earlier smugness completely gone. The officer spoke with him briefly before asking him to step out of the car. After a tense exchange, the guy was handcuffed and led to the patrol car. Jake's voice came through the Nextel again, filled with glee. "They've got him, he's getting arrested." We couldn't contain our excitement. Tony fist pumped the air and Sam, usually so quiet, let out a cheer. We watched as the officer drove off with the guy in the back seat, feeling a rush of triumph and satisfaction. Justice had been served and we had played our part in it. A few days later, the police blotter confirmed what we had hoped. The guy had been arrested for driving with a suspended license. This information only added to our satisfaction, but the story didn't end there. Word around town travels fast, and soon we started hearing more about the guy's situation. It turned out that this wasn't his first run-in with the law. He had a history of traffic violations and had already been caught driving on a suspended license before. This arrest meant serious consequences for him. We learned that he was facing a court hearing that could potentially lead to significant penalties, including jail time. The gravity of the situation hit us. Our actions had set in motion a chain of events that would profoundly impact his life. We decided to attend the court hearing, curious to see how it would all unfold. The courtroom was packed, mostly with people waiting for their cases to be heard. When it was the rude guy's turn, he walked in looking much less confident than he had at the billiards place. His lawyer tried to argue for leniency, pointing out that he wasn't driving under the influence that night. However, the prosecutor painted a different picture, highlighting his repeated offenses and disregard for the law. The judge listened carefully before delivering the verdict. Considering the guy's history and the fact that he'd been caught driving on a suspended license yet again, the judge decided to make an example out of him. The rude guy was sentenced to 90 days in jail and had his license suspended for an additional year. He also had to pay a hefty fine and complete community service once he was released. As we sat there listening to the verdict, a mix of emotions washed over us. There was a sense of satisfaction, of course, knowing that he wouldn't be causing trouble for a while, but there was also a sobering realization of how severe the consequences were for him. After the hearing, we gathered outside the courthouse reflecting on everything that had happened. "I guess he won't be bothering anyone at the billiards place for a while," Tony said, trying to lighten the mood. We all nodded, but there was a shared understanding that this experience had taught us something deeper about justice and accountability. In the following weeks, our visits to the billiards place resumed their usual routine. The atmosphere was back to its friendly, relaxed vibe. We played our games, watched sports, and enjoyed each other's company without any more disruptions. The incident with the rude guy became a story we would tell from time to time, a reminder of the night we took a stand and saw justice served. We also became more mindful of the people around us, recognizing the importance of treating everyone with respect and standing up against those who don't. Now, unlike the first story, I think it's a little bit clearer that in this story, what they did was a lot more acceptable. I mean, not only was that guy just a total jerk in general, but getting somebody who is driving around clearly intoxicated and dangerously driving at that off the road and get them held accountable for that, I don't think there's any room for deliberation. Our next story is Dad's friend is a perv, so I bashed his new Camaro. Growing up, I, 22-year-old male, have always heard stories about my dad's best friend, Perry, 51-year-old male. According to everything he told us, they'd been friends since childhood. They were next door neighbors, I think, so they practically grew up together. They parted ways after my dad went to college. Perry couldn't go to college because his uncle, who he lived with after his parents passed, couldn't afford it. He got a job and helped around his uncle's house till he decided to enlist in the army. He had been there ever since. The most intriguing fact about my dad and his best friend is the fact that even after over 2 decades apart, they were still very close. I had grown apart from people I'd called my best friends more times than I can actually count. One time, my best friend in middle school went to summer camp in a different country for just 3 months. We tried to keep in touch, but after 1 month, it just became too tiring to have to text and video call. When he got back, we tried to keep being friends, but it just wasn't the same, and after a while, we just stopped talking. This was why it was so surprising to me that my dad could still be best buddies with someone he hadn't seen in years. From the way my dad talked about him, it was obvious how much respect my dad had for him. He absolutely adored this man, and from the stories I had heard, I could understand why. He had told us about all of Perry's war stories, how he saved his entire squad from perishing at the hands of insurgents, how he helped American aid workers get to the safety during an intense shootout with the enemy, among other heroic deeds. Perry was a decorated soldier, and because of his valiant efforts, he'd been promoted multiple times and was in charge of one of the most elite forces in the country. This was why he never came home. He was always traveling with his team around the world on different missions. Perry sounded like a fairy tale. Dad's description of him made him sound way too perfect to exist in this crappy world. A part of me actually thought Dad made this entire character called Perry to cope with the fact that he didn't have a lot of friends, because it didn't make sense that he'd be fine with only talking on the phone with someone for over 20 years without growing distant. But then something happened that I wasn't expecting. My dad called us, me and my younger sister Kaylee, 17-year-old female, into his study one day and told us that Perry was returning to the country. We were all so excited for him. Seeing your best friend after ages is something really special. It's like finally getting to meet your long-distance lover for the first time. I was even more excited than others. I had just gotten to my final year of college and I was thinking of enlisting in the army. After all the stories my dad had told me about the exciting things Perry had done, I was inspired to do these things myself. So I wanted to talk to a real veteran before taking the next steps. So on the day of his arrival, we all went to the airport to receive him. It was the most beautiful reunion I've ever seen. Dad was so happy. He was like a teenager again. The plan was for Perry to get a hotel, pending the time he got a place to stay, but after he came to our place to have lunch, Mom invited him to stay with us till he got some place of his own. Dad couldn't be more thrilled. I finally got my chance to talk to him, and yeah, he seemed like everything Dad described at first. I first noticed something off about him on the 3rd day of his arrival. We were having dinner, and while he and my dad discussed what it was like out in battle, I noticed him stealing glances at my sister Kaylee. At first, I thought it was just him glancing at everyone and trying to carry them along as he told his story, but he looked at her a lot more than he did everyone else. I didn't know what it was all about, so I decided not to read too much into it. After dinner, I headed into my room and Kaylee followed right behind. She asked me if I saw how Uncle Perry was looking at her. I laughed it off and told her it wasn't a big deal because I wanted to believe it wasn't a big deal. What else would it be? Well, I found out soon enough. Perry was supposed to stay with us for a week max, but after the week, mom or dad would find a reason for him to stay longer. They would buy tickets to a weekend movie show and would tell him to wait until then, or because he was good with repairs. Mom would always find something around the house for him to fix. Just like that, a week had turned into 3, and Perry had gotten comfortable with not having to pay rent or put in a down payment for a house. He bought a car, a sleek blue Chevrolet Camaro. It was an irresponsible purchase, seeing that he didn't even have his own place yet, but for some reason my dad didn't see it that way. He praised him for getting such a cool whip. I still liked and respected Perry at this point, but I wasn't brainwashed like Dad. I could see that buying the car was a mistake, and I didn't hesitate in telling him. I asked him if he should be spending money on a flashy car when he didn't have a place to stay, and he said my dad invited him to stay however long he wanted, so he would slowly recoup the money and get his own place. Next, I went to Dad and asked him why he was allowing Perry to make such an irresponsible decision. His answer was that Perry had been in the army for so long, he didn't get married or start a family because he was so dedicated. Right out of high school, he had to make the right decisions and do the right thing, even when people his age were in college, partying and hooking up. He said Perry deserved to be irresponsible for some time too. I didn't agree with him one bit, but there was no point in arguing. Besides, all he was doing was spending his money on frivolous things while freeloading off of my very successful parents. It wasn't like he was hurting anyone, right? Wrong. One Friday morning, Dad, who was supposed to take me and Kaylee camping, got called into work. He had no choice but to leave. We were going to cancel, but then Perry volunteered to take us. I thought it was weird that he would volunteer, but our youngest brother Caleb, 8-year-old male, was excited about it, and I didn't want to be the party pooper, so I decided to go with it. The trip started out great, and I actually enjoyed myself. But then it got weird when we decided to roast marshmallows for s'mores. We all had our marshmallows roasting, but Perry decided that Kaylee wasn't roasting her marshmallows the right way? I mean, what is the right way to roast marshmallows? He went to sit right beside her and held her hand, holding it out to the fire. At this point, I was sure that something was up, but I didn't want to believe that it was what I thought it was. Also, I didn't want to confront him out of respect for my dad. Instead, I offered to help Kaylee roast her marshmallows. We also decided to all sleep in one tent instead of Kaylee getting her own. After that weird camping trip, I started to watch Perry even more carefully. I didn't want to go to Dad with allegations I couldn't prove. The only way to get evidence of his intentions with Kaylee was to put her in his way, and I didn't want to risk her well-being, so I couldn't do that either. I lived with that dilemma for days. The only feasible solution was to keep her safe while trying to convince Dad to kick him out of the house. Over the next few days and weeks, I made sure to keep an eye on Perry. I didn't let him get too close to my sister. Whenever he tried, and he did try, I would call her, pretending to want to show her something interesting or that we wanted to play a video game. My charade worked for a while until one day, Mom sent me to get some groceries from the store. She was working overtime and she wouldn't have time to stop by the store. My siblings and I were the only ones home at the time, and I thought it was going to be a quick in and out so I could get back immediately, but there was a line at the cashier point, so I got delayed. Eventually, I got home and found Kaylee in the living room. Perry was sitting very close to her, and I could see the discomfort in her face. I could tell that I walked in at just the right time or something crazy might have happened. I asked for Kaylee's help in stocking the groceries in the kitchen, and when we were alone, I asked if anything happened. She said he only asked her weird questions about her period and if she has a boyfriend. It only started to get intense when I walked in. We considered telling Mom and Dad again. They were more inclined to believe us if we were saying the same thing, but I still wasn't sure. It was Perry's word against ours, and who wouldn't believe the decorated army vet? So we decided to get some evidence. It was our only choice at this point. That evening, we planned our move. Since Mom and Dad went to work and Caleb was at summer camp, Perry, Kaylee, and me were the only ones at home. It made evidence collecting easier. The next day after they went to work, I pretended to go out to see some friends and then climbed back in through my window. Kaylee went to the living room to watch a movie, and as expected, Perry came to join her. I crept into the kitchen with my video camera, and when Perry started to get all pervy, I got it all on tape with clear evidence of Kaylee resisting. When that was done, I walked into the living room and grabbed Kaylee. We stayed in my bedroom till our parents arrived. We couldn't confront him while we were the only ones at home. Who knows how far he would go to keep his secret? But when we all settled for dinner, Kaylee and I excused ourselves. We went to the garage and grabbed a couple of sledgehammers, which we used on Perry's car. When they heard the commotion in the driveway, they came out. You should have seen the look on Perry's face. He was truly horrified at the sight of his beat-up car. When Dad demanded an explanation, we showed him the video. We finally explained that it had been happening for some time, but we couldn't tell them because we didn't have proof. Perry tried to deny the whole thing, but with the damning evidence on the phone, nobody believed him. Dad threw him out and told him to never show his face near his family again. But that wasn't enough for Mom. After he left, she called the police and gave them the video, airing her intentions to press charges. It took a while, but Perry was eventually sent to prison. All was right in the world, but till today, I still feel bad for Dad. Perry was his best friend for decades. He had no idea what he had turned into over the years, and he had to live with the guilt of inviting him into our home. On the bright side, because I stepped in and took action, Kaylee didn't get abused, and we finally got that perv what he deserved. So I'm assuming if this guy ended up getting in prison, he either had some stuff on him, or what he did in that video was a lot more than even what OP was kind of suggesting. Honestly, it's almost just downright depressing that OP and their sister felt like they couldn't even open up to their parents and tell them that this guy is being a predator because they're afraid their parents won't believe them. Like the fact that Kaylee did have to be in the line of fire to get enough evidence to get this guy seriously considered what he is. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.